Now let's see the rules after the section that we have seen in the last lecture. So the rules are simple, and as you know, you have to remember only the form numbers and the time limits and certain conditions, not everything given in the rules. So rule 89 says application for refund of tax, interest, penalty, fees or any other amount. So the language is to be forgotten. Any person except the persons covered under notification issued under 55. So 55 has a different rule. This is for 54. Claiming refund of tax, interest, penalty, fees or any other sum or amount paid by him under other than refund of integrated tax paid on goods exported out of India. Other than refund of integrated tax paid on goods exported out of India. That is excluded here in 89 because that is covered by a different rule. So that also we'll see later on. May file an application electronically in RFD1. So this is the form number RFD1 through the common portal, either directly or through a facilitation center. Provided that any claim for refund relating to balance in electronic cash ledger as governed by 496 may be made through a return furnished in form GSTR 3 or 4 or 7 as the case may be. There is the normal return, the monthly return. This also we had seen. Provided further that in respect of supplies to Special Economic Zone unit or developer, the application for refund shall be filed by the supplier of goods after such goods have been admitted in full in the Special Economic Zone for authorized operations as endorsed by the zone officer. So if you are supplying to SEZ unit, we have to get it approved from the SEZ officer. And supplier of services, if we supply service, then with such evidence regarding receipt of service for authorized operations as endorsed by the officer of the zone. And then further proviso which is amended with effect from October 17 is provided also that in respect of supplies regarded as deemed exports means those the FTP schemes, foreign trade policy schemes, the application may be filed by the recipient of deemed export supplies or the supplier of deemed export supplies in cases where the recipient does not avail of the input tax credit. If the recipient has not availed the credit, then the supplier can claim the refund. And furnish an undertaking to the effect that the supplier may claim the refund. So the recipient may give a certificate to the supplier that you go and claim the refund, I am not going to take the ITC. So in that case the supplier can claim the refund. Or if the input tax credit has been taken by the recipient, then the recipient can claim the refund. And then notification number 48/17 is given, which defines deemed exports. So the government has notified deemed exports in this notification. What are these? We have seen deemed exports at many places. Now let's see what are deemed exports. Number 1, supply of goods by a registered person against advance authorization. Now these are different things which we have already studied in FTP in customs. If you have studied, if you have not, then you will study in detail. So in foreign trade policy, there are certain types of benefits which are given to exporters, and these are covered here. They are called as deemed exports. Supply of goods by a registered person against advance authorization. So here is an actual exporter who is exporting the goods out of India, say to USA, and he has an advance authorization which allows him to purchase goods from a local supplier. So here is a local supplier in India who supplies goods to this actual exporter against advance authorization. Means his actual exporter is authorized by the department to purchase goods locally. So this supply will be called as deemed export. Okay, first one, advance authorization. Proviso says that provided that the goods so supplied when exports have already been made after availing input tax credit on inputs used in manufacture of such exports shall be used in manufacture and supply of taxable goods other than nil rated or fully exempted goods, and a certificate to this effect from a chartered accountant is submitted to the jurisdictional commissioner of GST or any other officer authorized by him within 6 months of such supply. Basically what it means is that when these goods are supplied by the local supplier to the actual exporter, they should be used for manufacturing goods which are exported out of India. Okay, but it may happen that this actual exporter might have used some old stock to manufacture goods and they have already been exported. So then these goods which are coming from the local supplier should be used later on for manufacturing those goods on which the tax would be paid, okay, later on. So that is given there, that he should then use it in the manufacture and supply of taxable goods and not any nil rated or exempted goods. So that can happen, that the old stock has been already used. Old stock was the duty paid stock that has already been used to manufacture goods and they are exported out of India. Then what he can do is he can purchase new inputs without payment of tax as a recompensation for the old inputs. Old inputs were duty paid, so new inputs will be without duty paid, so they will compensate for it. Simple. And provided further that no such certificate of chartered accountant shall be required if input tax credit has not been availed on inputs used in manufacture of export goods. So if the old inputs which you had purchased and no input tax credit was taken on it, then in that case the CA certificate is not required. But if input tax credit was taken, then the certificate will be required. Then second is supply of capital goods by a registered person against export promotion capital goods authorization. EPCG scheme it is called as. Now I will not explain in deep what are these schemes. This you must have studied there. If not, then you will study it in FTP, foreign trade policy. Similarly, supply of goods by a registered person to export oriented unit EOUs, and supply of gold by a bank or public sector undertaking specified in the notification number 50/17 customs dated 30th June 17 against advance authorization. Just remember it, okay. And the explanation says that advance authorization, export promotion capital goods authorization and export oriented unit, all of these are defined under foreign trade policy. So you have to follow that definition. Then provided also that the refund of any amount after adjusting the tax payable by the applicant out of advance tax deposited by him under section 27 at the time of registration shall be claimed in the last return required to be furnished by him. Just write down there CTP and NRTP. This proviso is for the CTP and the NRTP, non-resident taxable person and casual taxable person, those who have given the advance deposit, and then when their registration period comes to an end, they will file the last return. So whatever balance is left in the last return, that will be allowed to them as a refund. Shall be claimed in the last return, not in between. So they cannot claim refund in between, they have to claim the refund at the end in the last return. Then the application under sub rule 1 shall be accompanied by any of the following documents. This is again an important point, so this you can remember, question may come. What are the documents on the basis of which the refund claim can be filed? Okay, so let's see. A. The reference number of the order or a copy of the order passed by the proper officer or an appellate authority or appellate tribunal or court resulting in such refund, or reference number of the payment of the amount specified in subsection 6 of 107 or 8 of 112 claimed as refund. So these are the court order refunds, refund arising out of court order. So then you have to attach the reference number of the order. of the code, or the copy itself. You give the copy of the order itself. Then number 2, statement containing the number and date of shipping bills or bill of export, and the number and the date of the relevant export invoices in a case where the refund is on account of export of goods. So second point is regarding export of goods. So if you are claiming refund because you have exported the goods out of India, then you have to give the reference number of the shipping bill or bill of export along with the export invoices. Then statement containing the number and date of invoices and the relevant bank realization certificates or foreign inward remittance certificates, as the case may be, in case of refund is on account of export of services. In case of export of services, you have to prove that you have brought the foreign exchange into India. Okay, so for that the bank realization certificate is required from the bank in which the foreign exchange has been deposited, or the foreign inward remittance certificate. Then a statement containing the number and date of invoices as provided in Rule 46 along with the evidence regarding the endorsement specified in the second proviso of Sub Rule 1 in the case of supply of goods made to a special economic zone unit or developer. So in that case you have to give the details of the invoices that you have issued to them if you have supplied goods to SEZ unit or developer. Then statement containing the number and date of invoices, the evidence regarding the endorsement, so on and so forth, along with proof thereof made by the recipient to the supplier for authorized operations as defined under Special Economic Zones Act. Similarly for SEZ developer, that we have supplied goods to him. Then a declaration to the effect that the Special Economic Zone unit or the developer has not availed the input tax credit. They haven't taken the input tax credit, because if they take the credit, then we will not get the refund. Okay, so we need a declaration from them that they have not claimed the input tax credit. And lastly, a statement containing the number and date of invoices along with such other evidence as may be notified in the case where refund is on account of deemed exports. So that also you have to give the invoices. And under this point number G, the notification is issued 49/17. The central government hereby notifies the following as detailed in the table below as evidences which are required to be produced by the supplier of deemed export supplies for claiming refund. So this you can go through once. You will not understand anything but go through it once and then forget it. Then H point, statement containing the number and date of invoices received and issued during the tax period in case where the claim pertains to refund of any unutilized input tax credit under 54(3), where the credit has accumulated on account of rate of tax on the inputs being higher than the rate of tax on the output supplies. There were two cases of 54(3) refund. One was the export case, and second zero rated supply case, and second was where the input rate is higher than the output rate. So in that case you have to give the details. So you have to submit a statement containing the number and date of invoices received, that is invoices regarding your inputs. You have to give details of that. Then reference number of the final assessment order and a copy of the said order in case where the refund arises on account of the finalization of provisional assessment. So sometimes if we have gone for the provisional assessment and paid tax and then final assessment is less, then we get the refund. So in that you have to submit the details of finalization of assessment. Okay, so you have to attach the final assessment order. Then a statement showing the details of transactions considered as intrastate supply but which is subsequently held to be interstate supply. Now this is a case where you have paid taxes intrastate, so you have paid central tax, and later on it is found to be interstate, so you will have to pay IGST. So when you pay IGST, you get the refund of central tax and state tax that you have paid earlier by mistake. So that point. Then statement showing details of amount of claim on account of excess payment of tax the excess case where you have paid excess tax by mistake. So how did you pay that tax? You have to explain that. And a declaration to the effect that the incidence of tax, interest or other amount claimed as refund has not been passed on. So finally you have to give a declaration that you have not passed on the incidence of tax to any other person. In a case where the amount of refund claimed does not exceed 2 lakh rupees. This also we have seen, less than 2 lakh. So less than 2 lakhs you have to just give a declaration. More than 2 lakhs you have to actually prove it. Provided that a declaration is not required to be furnished in respect of the cases covered under clause A, B, C, D or F of 8 of 54. That is, in these cases you don't have to prove unjust enrichment. Then a certificate in annexure 2 required by issued by a chartered accountant or a cost accountant to the effect that the incidence of tax, interest or any other amount claimed as refund has not been passed on to any other person in a case where the amount claimed as refund exceeds rupees 2 lakhs. So if it exceeds rupees 2 lakhs, then you have to prove it. And how will you prove it? That the incidence has not been passed on? By taking a certificate from chartered accountant or a cost accountant. And this certificate is also not required in clause A, B, C, D of and F of subsection 8 of 54. Because these are the specific refund cases. So here you don't need to prove unjust enrichment. And for the purpose of this rule, the refund, this explanation is of no use. Just cut it off. Then where the application relates to refund of input tax credit, the electronic input tax credit, then electronic credit ledger has to be debited by the amount equal to the refund claimed. It has not yet been given to you, but when you file a claim, you have to reverse that much credit. Means you have to make a debit entry in your electronic credit ledger. So suppose I am claiming refund of 5 lakhs, I will debit 5 lakhs to my electronic credit ledger. And then if I am given 5 lakhs, very good. If I am given only 3 lakhs by the department, then 2 lakhs I will recredit to my electronic credit ledger. Then in case of zero rated supply of goods or service of both without payment of tax under bond or letter of undertaking in accordance with 16(3) that we have seen of IGST Act, refund of input tax credit shall be granted as per the following formula. Now it's interesting. This is called as the maximum refund. Okay, though it is given refund amount, but that is called as maximum refund. What will be the maximum amount that you can claim as refund? Okay, now this is interesting. Question may come on this, so let me explain this in detail. Read it again. In case of zero rated supply means export, you can say, under bond or letter of undertaking, in accordance with 16(3) of IGST Act that we have seen earlier, refund of input tax credit shall be granted as per the following formula. Formula is refund amount. Refund amount means maximum refund amount. This is not the exact refund that you will get. This is the maximum that you can get. So if your claim is less, you will get the claim, but your claim should not exceed this amount. So what is this amount? Turnover of zero rated supply of goods divided by plus turnover of zero rated supply of services into net ITC divided by adjusted total turnover. Means basically what we are doing is averaging the ITC. So adjusted total turnover means the total turnover of your business, which includes taxable as well as exports. And in the numerator you are going to take the export turnover, turnover of zero rated supply of goods and zero rated supply of service. So in the numerator we are going to take zero rated turnover, in the denominator we are going to take the total turnover, adjusted total turnover, and multiply it by net ITC. So net ITC into net ITC, the ITC that we have taken, into zero rated supply turnover divided by total turnover. So what we'll get? We'll get the proportionate amount of ITC for zero rated supplies. That is the maximum that you can claim. Now let me tell you the logic first, and then we'll see the formula. The logic is very simple. See, if I am a person, this is ABC Enterprise, okay, it has brought inputs and the total tax on the input paid is say 10,000 rupees. Now these inputs have been used in both the taxable supply in India, domestic supply, as well as the export supply, that is the zero rated supply. Okay, so we are making both the supplies, the domestic and the export. Now I say that the turnover of taxable supply for this period is say 10 lakhs and the export supply is another 10 lakhs. Okay, this is the turnover, 10 lakhs and 10 lakhs. Means if we divide the input tax credit, this tax has been taken as credit, we have availed input tax credit of 10,000 rupees. Now if I apportion this 10,000 over my turnovers, then it will be equal, because both the turnovers are 10 means total turnover is 20 lakhs, right? So that is equal. Means apportion credit would be 5,000, right? But what happens is that suppose the tax on my taxable turnover is only 3,000. The actual tax, the actual GST is 3,000. So if I just debit this 3,000 to my electronic credit ledger, electronic credit ledger has been credited by 10,000. If I debit 3,000, then I am left with 7,000. So the balance in my account is 7,000. The balance in electronic credit ledger is 7,000. So can I claim full 7,000 as refund? No. My refund will be restricted to this 5,000. So this 5,000 is the amount that I have calculated in that formula. What is the formula? Net ITC. So this is the total ITC claim. This is called as the net ITC into export supply, that is zero rated supply turnover, divided by total supply. So total supply is 20 lakh, export supply is 10 lakhs. So 10,000 into 10 lakh upon 20 lakh will give me 5,000. 5,000 is the maximum that I can claim. That means that if my balance in electronic credit ledger is more, I cannot claim full refund. So it will be 5,000 or the balance in electronic credit ledger, whichever is less. So it will be these two, whichever is less. So here the maximum refund given will be 5,000 only. Understood? So to keep this check, otherwise somebody would have claimed full 7,000 as a refund. That is not allowed, because the proportionate inputs that have been used for making zero rated supply, the ITC on those goods is only 5,000. So maximum refund allowed to you will be 5,000. But if the balance in ECL is less, if the balance in ECL is say only 3,600, then you will get full 3,600 as a refund. Okay. So that is the simple logic behind this. Now let's see the formula in detail. So formula is net ITC into turnover of zero rated supply of goods and service. So it is goods plus service means total divided by adjusted total turnover. Now let's see the definition of all these three. So refund amount first is defined, means the maximum refund that is admissible. So that I have already explained to you. This is the maximum refund. Then net ITC. What is this net ITC? Means the input tax credit availed on inputs and input services during the relevant period, that is the month, other than the input tax credit availed for which refund is claimed under sub rule 4A and 4B or both. 4A and 4B we will see below. So wait for that. So if you claim refund under 4A or 4B, then that much will be reduced to get the net ITC. So net ITC means total ITC taken less any refund that you have claimed under 4A or 4B. Okay. So if you claim this refund, part refund, then that will be reduced. The balance will be called as net ITC. Means basically net ITC means the total ITC taken. Right? Very good. Then turnover of zero rated supply of goods means, so first we'll see for goods, means the value of zero rated supply of goods made during the relevant period, means that month, without payment of tax under bond or letter of undertaking other than the turnover which is claimed under 4A 4B. Means again the turnover which you have claimed under 4A 4B shall be reduced. The balance will be taken here. Okay. So that is goods. Value of zero rated supply of goods which is made under bond or letter of undertaking. Okay, during the relevant period. Then what is the turnover for services? Slightly different footing. Turnover for services is calculated on a different footing. What it means? It means the value, first you take the value of zero rated supply of services made without payment of tax under bond or letter of undertaking, calculated in the following manner. Namely, zero rated supply of service is the aggregate of payments received. So here you will not just see the value of supply, you will see the payments received. Payments received during the relevant period for zero rated supply of services and zero rated supply of services where supply has been completed for which payment had been received in advance in any period prior to the relevant period, reduced by advances received for zero rated supply for which supply of service has not been completed during the relevant period. My goodness. Did you got anything? No? Let me explain. It's very simple definition. See, for services, for goods what is relevant is the supply. So if this is my period, the tax period for which I am claiming the refund, then for goods what I will do is I will take value of supply which is zero rated. So supplies that have been made. Now whether I have received the amount or not is irrelevant. Whether we have collected the money from the buyers or not is irrelevant. We have to just see the value of supply. So for goods it is simple, value of supply. But for service, what we have to do, let's see. If this is my tax period, the relevant period, okay, then I will not see how much services I have supplied. I will not see the value of invoices. Remember, we will not see the value of invoices. That how many invoices I have issued during this period. No, no, no. What we are going to see is the amounts received in convertible foreign exchange. The money that you have brought in, the amount received or brought in convertible foreign exchange. That is to be seen. Amount received during the current period. But the amount received during the current period may include some advance. Advance which is received here, but services are not yet given. Services will be given in future. So that advance is to be reduced. You have to reduce the advance. And if any advance was received in the past period for which the service is completed during the current period, you will include that amount in this. Still not understood? Then let's see. I'll take you through 3 examples. Okay, so first we are going to take the amount received. Okay, now how? So let's take one example, that service completed. So I'll write, what should I write? Okay, I'll write COM, that is completion, is also in the current period, and the amount received is also in the current period. Both are in the current period, 1 lakh. So will you take this into consideration? Yes. Second, completion was before the tax period. This is my tax period. Okay, so I had completed one service before the tax period, but the amount is received during this tax period. So it will be taken as turnover of which tax period? This tax period, the past one, when it was completed? No, it will be taken here on receipt. So for services you have to take the receipt into consideration. So if the completion was before the tax period but the receipt is in the current tax period, it will be called as turnover of the current tax period. It will be taken as turnover on receipt basis. Okay, on receipt basis. Third one, if the receipt was earlier and the completion is now in the current tax period, then what? Will you take this receipt as turnover of this period when the service is not yet completed? No, because actual export is completion of service. Actual export is completion of service. So if the receipt was advance, this was called as advance received. So I'll write advance. If there is advance received in the previous tax period but the service was not completed and it is completed in the current period, then it will be considered as turnover of the current period. So this we have to add here. Okay, we have to take it in this tax period. And the last one, that if the advance is received during the current tax period and the service is going to be rendered in the future, the completion of service will be in the future, in the next tax period, then this advance received will be included in amount received. Amount received will include both this receipt and this receipt. So will this receipt be considered as turnover here? No, it is to be excluded. So this amount is to be excluded. It has to be reduced. It has to be reduced from the amount received. Means it will not be considered as turnover here, it will be considered as turnover on completion. Understood? And one more point I'll give you, if the service is completed here but the amount is not received, the amount is going to be received in future, then what? It will be considered as turnover on receipt basis later on. It will not be considered as turnover here. So this is not to be taken. Advance received also is not to be taken. Okay, so these two are not to be taken. Advance received but not completion, don't take it. Completion but money is not received, don't take it. Completed earlier but received now, take it. Advance received earlier but no completion and completion now, take it now. And if the completion is in this period and receipt also in this period, take it. It will be taken on receipt basis. So this you can take down. This is very important to remember. Done? Pause it and write it. Then the next definition is adjusted total turnover, which will take in the denominator, right? Which will take in the denominator. So this means the sum total of the value of the turnover in a state or union territory as defined in 2112, that's fine, excluding the turnover of services. So it says take total turnover excluding the services, means in clause A what you are going to take? You are going to take turnover of goods. So first we'll take turnover of goods, then we'll add to it, because it is a total of A and B. So then we'll add to it the turnover of zero rated supply of services determined in terms of clause D above. So the manner of calculation that we just saw in clause D of zero rated supply, all the additions, deletions, and non-zero rated supply of services. Means here you have to take the turnover of zero rated supplies, but the turnover of zero rated supplies will be calculated on the same lines as we did in clause D, which we are going to take in the numerator. Okay, so this is as per clause D, zero rated supplies plus the other supplies, other services. So for other services you will follow the normal method of calculation, that is whatever is the value of supply recorded in this period. So this is as per the books, this is as per the calculation of clause D that we have done for the numerator, and the same amount will be taken in the denominator for the zero rated supplies. Okay, and then you have to exclude from there. What do you have to exclude? So it says excluding the value of exempt supplies other than zero rated supplies. Means if there are any other kind of exempt supplies included in the total turnover, reduce them, because we don't take credit of any inputs in respect of exempt supplies. So therefore you exclude the exempt supplies from the turnover, and the turnover of supplies in respect of which refund is claimed under sub rule 4A or 4B or both, if any. 4A 4B we are going to see below. So 4A 4B gives a separate method of claiming refund. So if there is any refund claimed under those clauses, then the turnover of those types of supplies is also to be excluded here in subsection 4. Okay, so we'll exclude the amounts that you have claimed refund here from the ITC amount also, and from the total turnover also. The turnover in respect of the supplies will be excluded from the total turnover. Okay, so that is simple. And then at the last, relevant period is also defined. That what is the relevant period? Because this turnover is for the relevant period, during the relevant period. So what is the relevant period? Means the period for which claim has been filed. So there is no definition like 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. Period for which you file the claim becomes the relevant period. So if you are filing claim every month, then month will be the relevant period. If you are filing for 3 months, then 3 months is the relevant period. If you are filing the claim for 6 months, then 6 months is the relevant period. But a circular was issued in 2018, number 37 by 11 by 18, which says that you can file a claim for any period as you like. You can file for 1 month, you can file for 2 months or 3 months, or sometimes 3 months and then sometimes 1 month, as you wish. But the period for which you are claiming the refund should not go beyond 1 year. Means it should not include period of part of the 1 year and part of the second year. Like our year is April to March, so we cannot claim a refund for the month of January to June together. No, January to March we'll have to claim one, and then April, May, June we'll have to claim again in another application. Okay, so that is what is given here. The circular has clarified that the relevant period has been defined in the context of the refund claim and is not linked to tax period. The exporter at his option may file refund claim for 1 calendar month or quarter, or by clubbing successive calendar months or quarters. The calendar month or quarters for which refund claim has been filed, however, cannot spread across different financial years. This is the only requirement. It should not spread across different financial years. Otherwise you are free to choose your period. Okay, simple. And then comes these two special clauses, 4A and 4B. So if 4A says, now this you have to just remember theoretically. 4A says in case of supplies received on which supplier has availed the benefit of notification 48 by 17, refund of input tax credit availed in respect of other inputs or input services used in making zero rated supply of goods or service, or both shall be granted. And second is in case of supplies received on which supplier has availed the benefit of notification 40 by 17 or 41 by 17 integrated tax, or 78 of customs or 79 of customs, or all of them, refund of input tax credit availed in respect of inputs received under the said notifications for export of goods, and input tax credit availed in respect of other inputs or input services to the extent used in making such export of goods shall be granted. So if you have claim benefit of these notifications and claim refund, then fine, that is a refund which is directly given. Apart from that, refund can be claimed under subsection 4, sub rule 4, according to the formula. And then at the last is subsection 5. In case of refund on account of inverted duty structure. Inverted duty structure means where the duty on inputs is higher as compared to output. My inputs come at 18% GST, but my output is liable to only 12% GST or 6% or 5% as the case may be. So that is called as inverted duty structure. So in this case, refund of input tax credit shall be granted as per the following formula. Maximum refund amount. Again, this is not the refund amount, this is maximum refund that you will get. So what is the actual refund that you get? The maximum limit or the amount in your electronic credit ledger, the balance amount in the ECL, electronic credit ledger, whichever is less. That is the actual refund. Okay, so what is the maximum? See, turnover of inverted rated supply of goods and services into net ITC divided by adjusted total turnover less tax payable on such inverted rated supply of goods and services. Okay, so what is the formula? Net ITC, that ITC that we have taken during the relevant period. This is just like subsection 4. Only difference is that was for a different reason, this is for different reason. So net ITC into turnover of inverted rated supply divided by total turnover, adjusted total turnover. So this is the what we can say, the ratio in which we are dividing our ITC, that what is my ITC in relation to these goods and services where there is inverted rated supply. Okay, because all my goods may not be inverted rated, some of them may be. So that supply I'll make separate. So ITC that I have taken, total ITC into turnover of inverted rated supply of goods and service divided by the adjusted total turnover. So in this formula what I'll get is the proportionate ITC in relation to these goods and services, because this ITC is taken for the total turnover. So how much for the inverted rated supply? So we are taking out the proportion. From this we'll reduce the tax that we have paid on these inverted rated supply. Obviously, because this is total ITC. Some of this ITC might have been used now for paying tax on inverted rated supply. So therefore you reduce that. So less tax paid on inverted rated supply of goods and service. So this formula gives me the proportionate ITC. From that proportionate ITC, I reduce the tax paid on IRS. So I will get the balance which is left after setting off. The balance which is left after setting off means here I am getting goods at 10% and here I am paying only 5%. So out of 10, 5 is gone, it is utilized. The balance 5 which is left will be called as the maximum refund possible. And then we'll compare this with the actual balance. So we'll compare this with actual balance. This is 1, the maximum. Then 2, actual balance in electronic credit ledger. And the refund will be whichever is less. So it's like that. And the definitions of net ITC and adjusted total turnover will be same as we have computed in sub rule 4. Okay, and excluding the 4A and 4B, excluding, because separate method is followed for those two subsections, sub rules. So excluding those two, we'll find out the balance. So very simple, right? So that was whole rule 89, and then rule 90 and further is given. So these are now the simple procedural points. Let's see one of them, acknowledgement, that where the application relates to claim for refund from the electronic cash ledger An acknowledgement in RFD2 shall be made available to the applicant to the common portal electronically, clearly indicating the date of filing of the claim of refund and the time period under 54(7) shall be counted from such date of filing. The application for refund other than the claim for refund from electronic cash ledger shall be forwarded to the proper officer, who shall within period of 15 days of filing of the said application scrutinize the application. This is for other than cash ledger, for its completeness, and where the application is found to be complete in terms of sub rule 2, 3, 4 of 89, an acknowledgement in RFD2 shall be made available to the applicant to the common portal, clearly indicating the date of filing of the claim of refund and the time period under 54(7) shall be counted from such date. Then where any deficiencies are noticed, the proper officer shall communicate the deficiencies in application to the applicant in form RFD3. Means if your application for refund has some deficiencies, it will be informed to you in RFD3 through common portal, requiring him to file fresh refund application after rectification of deficiencies. And where the deficiencies have been communicated in RFD3, the same shall also be deemed to have been communicated under this rule along with the deficiencies communicated under sub rule 3. That's also fine. If the state officer has given you the deficiency memo, this is called as deficiency memo. So if the state officer has given you the deficiency memo under SGST Act, then it will be deemed to have been given under CT Act also. Then rule 91 is there, grant of provisional refund. So what it says, provisional refund in accordance with the provisions of subsection 6 of 54 shall be granted subject to condition that the person claiming the refund. So we had seen section 54(6) grant of provisional refund. So now the rule gives the condition. Condition is that the person claiming refund has during any period of 5 years immediately preceding the tax period to which the claim for refund relates, not been prosecuted for any offence under the Act or under an existing law where the amount of tax evaded under this Act or under existing law. Existing law means the old laws, the excise, service tax, etc., where the amount of tax evasion exceeds 250 lakh rupees. Means you should be a clean person. You should not have been prosecuted, means put to jail. Prosecution means the criminal offence is registered against you. You are put to jail for an offence exceeding 250 lakh rupees. Okay. So if you have done a fraud in the past 5 years and have been prosecuted for an amount exceeding 250 lakh rupees, then provisional refund will not be granted to you. Okay. Simple. Then sub rule 2 says that the officer, after scrutiny of the claim and the evidence submitted in support thereof, and on being prima facie satisfied that the amount claimed as refund under sub rule 1 is due to the applicant in accordance with 54(6), shall make an order in RFD 04 sanctioning the amount of refund due to the said applicant on a provisional basis within a period not exceeding 7 days from the date of acknowledgement under sub rule 1 or 2 of 90. So within 7 days it will be granted to you. Simple. And provided that the order issued under RFD 4 shall not be required to be revalidated. There is no need for revalidation. Even if there is a delay, it can still be granted. There is no need to revalidate it. And the third point says that the proper officer shall issue a payment advice in RFD 5 for the amount sanctioned in sub rule 2, and the same shall be electronically credited to the bank account. Whatever bank accounts you have given, so if you have given more than one, then the credit amount can be electronically credited in any one of them which you have mentioned in your registration particulars. Okay, and as specified in the application for refund. Provided that the payment advice in RFD 5, this RFD 5, shall be required to be revalidated where the refund has not been disbursed within the same financial year in which the payment advice was issued. So if the payment advice was issued at the fag end of the year and the refund could not be granted within that year itself, but is to be granted in the next year, then it needs revalidation. Then order sanctioning the normal refund, that where upon examination of the application the officer is satisfied that refund under 5 of 54 is due and payable to the applicant, he shall make an order under RFD 6 sanctioning the amount of refund to which the applicant is entitled, mentioning therein the amount, if any, refunded to him on a provisional basis, amount adjusted against any outstanding demand under the Act. If there is any outstanding demand, it will be adjusted, and the balance amount refundable. Provided that in case where the amount of refund is completely adjusted against any outstanding demand under the Act or under any existing law, an order giving details of adjustment shall be issued in RFD 7, and nothing will be given to you in cash because it is fully adjusted. And where the officer or the commissioner is of the opinion that the amount of refund is liable to be withheld under the provisions of 10 or 11 or 54 that we had seen in the last lecture, he shall pass an order under part B of RFD 7 informing him the reasons for withholding such refund. And where the officer is satisfied for reasons to be recorded in writing that the whole or part of the amount claimed as refund is not admissible, now the rejection case is not admissible, or is not payable to the applicant, means it is refundable but not to the applicant, then he shall issue a notice in RFD 8 to the applicant requiring him to furnish a reply in RFD 9 within a period of 15 days of the receipt of the notice, and after considering the reply make an order in RFD 6 sanctioning the amount of refund in whole or part or rejecting the said refund claim. So he can accept or reject. And the said order shall be made available electronically to the applicant. And provided that no application for refund shall be rejected without giving an opportunity of being heard to the assessee, to the applicant. And then sub rule 4 comes. It says that where the officer is satisfied that the amount refundable under sub rule 1 or 2 is payable to the applicant under 8 or 54, he shall make an order in RFD 6. The order is in RFD 6 and issue payment advice in RFD 5 for the amount of refund, and the same shall be electronically credited to the bank account which he has given along with his registration particulars or specified in the application for refund. Simple. Provided that the order issued under RFD 6 shall not be required to be revalidated. There is no requirement of revalidation, but the payment advice of RFD 5 shall be required to be revalidated where the refund has not been disbursed within the same financial year. So if it is not refunded within the same financial year and is to be refunded in the next year, then it needs a revalidation. Okay, so order is not required to be revalidated, but the refund advice is required to be revalidated. And where the officer is satisfied that the amount refundable under sub rule 1 or 2 is not payable to the applicant, is not payable to you, it is refundable but not payable to you, then it will be deposited in the consumer welfare fund. So it is given the amount is credited to the consumer welfare fund. Then credit of amount rejected refund claim. If your refund claim is rejected, then the amount that you had debited to your electronic credit ledger can be recredited. So that is given here. That where the deficiencies have been communicated under sub rule 3 of 90 or 3 of 89 shall be recredited to the electronic credit ledger. And where the amount claimed as refund is rejected under 92, either fully or partly the amount debited to the extent of rejection shall be recredited to electronic credit ledger. Same. So this was complete rules as applicable under section 54. Great. So we'll take a break here and then we'll continue with rule 55, section 55 and some rules and other sections.